Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the fourth webinar in the Clubhouse of Development webinar series. Today, we'll be discussing how to turn your club and community members into donors. Before I introduce Cogeo and your speaker, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to use the GoToWebinar tool, and we'll review those after the presentation. Okay, a little bit about us. Cogeo is a leading expert in the sports nonprofit industry. Our management team has 50 years of fundraising experience and has raised over $650 million for nonprofit organizations. And one of the reasons that we're so passionate about working with sports and specifically soccer clubs like yourselves is that our leadership both played and coached soccer. And that includes your speaker today, Rob Cusell. As a college All-American and highly successful soccer coach, Rob Cusell is now the Managing Director of Consulting Services at Cogeo and has helped hundreds of sports organizations implement strong organizational development and fundraising strategies. So with that, I will pass it over to Rob.
Thanks, Mel. Let's go straight to slide number 3, which shows you the progression. Today we're going to talk about turning community and club members into donors. And so we're doing that currently with a bunch of clubs around the country, and sure enough, it can be done. Slide number 4, again, within the overall House of Development, demonstrate that this room is a building block. It's on the first floor, and it's going to create activity for the other floors invariably. And it's mostly retail and restricted for the most part. The 5th slide provides you the goals and some context for today. There are really 3 key areas we're going to cover. First area is learning why annual membership giving is in fact that second cornerstone of the fundraising work, being on the first floor of the development clubhouse. 2, understanding the true value of annual membership giving within the lifetime experience of a donor. And then data, third, the vital role of data. And we'll talk a little bit about how to best leverage data that's donor-centric and that will ensure that your club will have good data moving forward in perpetuity. The next slide, what is an annual giving program? Today, 2021, it's really, most of it is happening online. And we're seeing several things occurring. But really 2 key areas are at a minimum mass appeals with push-pull, email, or social media, and then making sure that you've got best practices, which included targeted stewardship to an intentionally segmented prospect and donor database periodically throughout the year. We recommend 3 appeals a year. One at the end of the year, November, December, right around Giving Tuesday. The second would be toward the end of the season in March to those members who haven't given in the first. And then the third would be when you're onboarding new parents after tryouts, late June, early July would be a good time. So chronologically, in the course of the calendar year, it starts in March, midsummer, and then end of year. Really 3 appeals. So how do you implement this? Today, really, you've got several things to think about. Time-based credit card subscriptions, so a monthly transaction. We see a lot of that, particularly in churches. Event, which mainly soccer-thons we recommend in terms of retail. Crowdfunding can work around specific projects. We prefer the soccer-thon as a crowdfunding tool, and that's probably preferable. We'll talk a little bit about the case study later in the presentation. Or you could do it as related to a signature event, much like Giving Tuesday, which many agencies are using that as their late year appeal. And then, as I mentioned, at a minimum, you should have a year-end appeal. It's a 501c3. The next slide, there are many reasons why annual giving is important. And pretty much anybody who's a 501c3 does that. And therefore, if you are a 501c3 club or have a foundation within a for-profit club, It's expected, and I would imagine many of your members would not be offended. As a matter of fact, none of them would. It's just that's business practices. So why is it important? It increases public awareness of the mission of the organization, and you can have tactics to attract new and incremental donors. There's some really good stewardship opportunities for current donors as they give, and then you can engage new and incremental volunteers within campaigns, committees, volunteer groups. It's a great way to raise incremental revenue that's not due-based, fee-based, and particularly in today's pay-to-play model, which is essentially, unless you have a generous financial aid program within the club, you're not allowing access to everybody who might have the skill or the desire to play at that level. We know this because we work with clubs where that's occurring, and we're trying to make a difference in terms of raising incremental funds to ensure at a minimum that financial aid is there. It's an opportunity to present a different image, particularly if you're just on a merger or something's happened in terms of leadership change. It's good for internal community building, getting parents to engage as volunteers and leveraging other parents. And it also definitely will promote external community building and partnerships with small businesses in particular. You're advancing your marketing and public relations initiatives. And it's also an opportunity to honor and thank and recognize individuals who become part of your donor base. And obviously, it's the cornerstone along with events, so it's really the first step in moving them up into major gifts and other areas of the housing development. And then the final and probably most important, it allows you to get data, really good data over time, which will pay dividends in the long term in particular. So there are many reasons why annual giving needs to be considered in terms of implementation at a minimum from a fundraising tactic. And the other thing I'll say is it's also so easy to do today with the web, and the key becomes timing and not super saturation. Next slide. So what are the challenges of annual giving? Because everybody's doing it, right? And you know that if you've gone to a university or a college, you're getting stuff from your college at a minimum, and then you're getting stuff from other agencies around your community, particularly last month and the month before. So what are the challenges? Really, there are 4 key challenges. It's crowded. So how do you stand out as families are receiving multiple appeals? And if you're going to execute this consistently on an annual basis, you're going to have volunteers involved and people involved. Therefore, that's a challenge as well. You might have large data population sets to manage. You've got a huge membership. That becomes a challenge. You've got to make sure you've got clean data. And then storytelling, because annual giving really is about storytelling. If our club were not in the community, how would the community be different? And so you really storytell around the great benefits that the club and its activities and its program, whether it's travel, whether it's competitive, whether it's elite, whether it's rec, whether it's adult, whether it's kids, really small kids playing, whether it's a top program. Compelling storytelling is really important. So who gives? Next slide. There's really, it's individuals. Individuals drive 70% of all fundraising historically, year to year. Now that's skewed a little bit because of religious and church activities, but it's still the bulk of giving comes from individuals. Therefore, who are the individuals in your ecosystem? Well, they're parents, current parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and close relatives and associates. So focus needs to be on individuals. Foundations play a role, 16%. Corporations, less so, 5%. And then bequests, which are really just wills and estates, represents a hefty 9%. So the moral here is really focus on individuals. And so what happens when you focus on individuals? This is one of my favorite stories. I headed up major gifts at Stanford, and Phil Knight, who's the chairman of Nike Corporation, is probably Stanford's largest donor. individual donor. And so how did that relationship begin? Well, Phil went to the University of Oregon and Stanford Business School. And so out of business school, he had an idea. He thought that the sneakers and the paraphernalia that elite track athletes were using and runners was really subpar. So he designed the original Nike. And if you're old enough, you'll remember the wafer, the original wafer, and essentially gave it away to both Stanford and Oregon, his alma maters, to the track programs there, track and field. And the athletes adored it right away. Right, so it cost him literally nothing, but the benefits to both of those track and field programs were enormous. The University of Oregon is very well known for its cross country and track and field, and a large part of that was due to the fact that Phil Knight established the program, endowed it, put up facilities, and supplied a lot of the equipment, certainly the shoes to begin with. Now, over the years, Nike has grown, as we know. His fortune has grown, and today at Stanford University, the School of Business and Management is the Phil Knight Center for Management. And there's also a Nike Knight Hennessy Scholars Program. Hennessy is the current president of Stanford University. And so over the course of his 30-year relationship with Stanford, he's given over $400 million. So where it started with a pair of track shoes, or 20, it evolved over 30 years as they cultivated him, made sure that he was engaged at the right levels, all the while not being beholden by him, never. They were able to then benefit from his philanthropy, as I mentioned, to the tune of $400 million. So that's just a great case study in terms of the progression from, again, shoes to a serious fortune. The next slide as a case study is interesting in terms of how, in this case, it was the ALS Society, Lou Gehrig's disease, had a brilliant idea, which was get a bunch of celebrities, essentially dump an ice bucket on themselves, and then to have their friends and families pledge a certain amount if in fact they did this. And so you might remember LeBron James was one of the first, and then everybody did this, from all the celebrity sports to all the rock stars and et cetera, and all the movie stars. I mean, it just got broad take. And of course, humans being humans, the general population there followed. There were parties, bucket throwing parties, et cetera, and they raised a lot of money, but they made a critical mistake. And this really relates to data. They didn't capture most of the individual's data. And they certainly didn't staff up to deal with all the new relationships that they had actually successfully activated through this brilliant marketing ploy, which was the Ice Bucket Challenge. And so the reason why we put this up as a case study is, while there was a great event that lasted a year plus and raised a ton of money, it was a failure long term, because data was not captured. They didn't staff up, they didn't ramp up, they didn't anticipate the kind of success they might have, and then they never reacted in time. The next slide is Soccer-thon. This one's going to happen next month at one of our clients, Orlando City Youth Soccer. And it's going to be over the course of 2 days, and it'll be staggered with age groups, the younger kids going during the day and the older kids in the evening and at night. It's going to take place indoors to ensure that it occurs. And it's a really nice facility, as you can see. And what they do is they essentially parcel it up into small games to ensure that there's a lot of activity. The other thing that can occur, we're not going to do it because it's February. You can also have, if you're doing this outdoors, you can have a lot of other activities around it, such as penalty kicks, a juggling contest, an accuracy contest, a dunking booth so that you can dunk coaches, etc., as well as raffles, which can be, again, very successful because you've got hundreds of people and families involved, ideally. Great thing about thons too is that it involves volunteers. Great way to engage volunteers. A good example of which would be to have current parent who might be a doctor, an orthopedic, on site for several hours to ensure that if there's any injury, that there's somebody giving advice, as well as other parents to help manage the event and the flow of the event. So it's a great way to raise awareness as well as significant funds, particularly if you have large turnout and good fundraising capacity. So the next slide, just some statistics, because it's important to understand what's really happening. And what we know is almost a third of giving occurs last month. 31% of annual giving occurs in December. That's why, again, you need to be in the game in terms of having a solicitation. And then over a quarter of nonprofits raised almost a half of their giving from that year-end ask. So much like retail shopping, to make an analogy to the retail industry, the same thing is true of fundraising retail. Most of it, a bunch of it happens in November, December. Here's a big one. The average online donation in 2018 is $128. However, if you've got a current donor or had a current donor prior, and they're recurring, the average donation for recurring donors is $326. And that again goes to the Phil Knight story, right? The more you cultivate and engage, the more they're going to give. In this case, it's almost triple the amount. It's between 2 and 3 times the amount. Oh, you know, Mel, I had added a slide on data, but that's okay. It didn't show up, I don't think. Oh, there it is. I'm sorry. Okay, slide 16. No, actually, no, hold on. I'm a little lost here, Mel. Slide 15, sorry. So best practices for annual and membership giving programs. And again, this is something that if you're going to do this, right, in terms of annual giving in particular, you need to adhere to a plan, right? And so you need to be strategic about how you're going to roll it out tactically, right? What's the frequency of appeals? We talked about 3 appeals within the context of a calendar year, and at a minimum, that year-end appeal. But who's going to author these appeals and why? Is it the executive director, the technical director, coach, or 4? Who's the author? And then once the appeal has gone out, you need to have tactical follow-ups, particularly with high net worth individuals. If you've done a well screening, you will have known. So there needs to be one-on-one follow-up and making sure that that occurs with volunteers, people who've committed, board members, as well as staff and coaches. Make sure that if you're telling your story through either a case statement or the website, in terms of making the ask, make sure that your storytelling is compelling and that you have access to quality design and videography if you're doing video in particular on your website, so that it stands out. There's some really good stuff out there. EMA, Empower Me Academy, which really does leadership. They've got some great videos. YSC Academy, the Philadelphia Union Academy, is also has got some great stuff on their website. But just check out different websites and you'll see. Database management, I'll touch on that in a second. But if in fact you're managing hundreds and hundreds of pieces of data, it needs to be in good shape. It needs to be segmented, understanding who needs to reside where. You know, there's a difference between a current parent and a past parent and how you're going to speak to them. There's a difference between an alum of the club, somebody who had played at the club and who's now aged out, however, in your database, and how you're going to speak to them. So segmenting is really important. The 4 areas of segment, it's really past parents, current parents, alumni, and then friends of the club, like the mayor, the city council, you know, people that are just friendly to the club. Make sure that if you're using different software systems, that everything's technologically integrated. Leadership. The board has to be behind this tactic. So if you're going to do annual giving and fundraising in general, the board has to be behind it. because they are the voice of the club on the external affairs side, and therefore they need to be advocates of the process and the resources that go into the process. And then full funnel approach really relates to making sure that you're speaking to all of the communities that are relevant and that you're speaking to them appropriately as you're disseminating information. So the next slide, number 16, data management. What are best practices in terms of data management? So at a minimum, there needs to be a CRM system. And we have great news here. If in fact you're a 501c3, there's arguably the best of breed software out there, Salesforce, that has given access to their 501c3 product and up to 10 licenses per client for free. And so it's a tremendous resource to ensure that you launch a fundraising program, that you have the data to back it up. And what does it do? Well, it does the data management that I just described. You can put codes and things that allow you to segment. It'll track giving as long as you input it properly. It'll, the fourth, if there are stewardship tools, it will actually ping you if in fact a note or some kind of email needs to go out. And it's incredibly helpful. It also syncs up with our well screening partner, so that as soon as we integrate new data into our client's Salesforce, it automatically does an analysis of the net worth of that data entity. And the most important thing is, not everybody's going to be at the club forever, right? There's turnover, and therefore you're going to leave strong data set for future administrators at the club, which is critical to long-term sustainability. So it's not just for today that it matters, but also for the future, your successors, in other words. All right, the penultimate slide, number 17. So what are some key takeaways from this half hour together today? Really, you want to optimize the balance between major gifts, which we talked about last week, or last month, I should say, and annual and membership giving, based on your capacity to execute. At a minimum, every club should do major gifts. And if they can overlay this concept, which is a bigger retail program, then that's a huge advantage, because it'll actually impact the major gifts program. Much like a soccer-thon or an event, it should be viewed as an entry point in the long-term relationship development strategy. And always think Nike. Okay, that is the prototype of what can happen if, in fact, you cultivate, engage, educate, steward over time. And then the last adage, which is critical, again, one thing you should realize is that the penetration rate within soccer clubs to date is not that much, right? So it's not like everybody's doing it, as you know. But those that have begun have a big advantage, and many of whom are actually having huge success for all the right reasons. I could name 5, 6, 7 clubs right now with which we work that are raising hundreds of thousands each year, and of dollars, right? Not Turkish lira, American dollars. So start small, do it right the way we just talked about, and then grow incrementally over time. And the most important thing is data management and making sure that that is done well. So I'm going to give it back to Mel, who's going to close out the session.
Great. Thanks so much for your time, Rob. I really appreciate it. And thanks for everybody who joined. We will be sure to send a link to the recording of the webinar, and it'll be on a platform that also gives you easy access to Cogeo. So if you have any follow-up questions, we'll be available for you. Okay, well, thanks everybody, and have a great rest of your day.